respectively.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Back in 2010, President Michael D. Higgins, then a TD here, made a very powerful intervention about the economic partnership agreements with African countries because they were threatening the lives of millions of African people. And we see similar here today with what is being proposed. Over the past 4 to 6 years, individually and through the Foreign Affairs Committee, I have met Colombian farmers, trade unionists, women community leaders, many linked to the Patriotic March. We met Judge Vargas, who is Vice President of the Constitutional Court, Dr. Lizanzo, and the concerns were all the same. The forced displacement, the evictions, the imprisonment, the torture, the assassinations and the murder, and this FTA is going to exacerbate that further. We have the figures. We know that Colombia is the most dangerous place in the world to be a trade unionist. We know the numbers of trade unionists, the farmers, the community leaders who are in jail. I think of Huber Ballesteros at the moment, and their crime, speaking out for their communities for violations of the human rights of those communities. And those rights are the right to cultivate land, the right to look for better conditions, better money for their crops, the right to meet and protest. And we come here today, a pathetic 1 hour and 15-minute debate on this FTA, an agreement that should not be ratified because it's not protecting the workers, the poor, the rural Colombian and Peruvian communities. I'll give some examples. The port of Buenaventura, massive expansion in the port, but tens of thousands of farmers forced off their land outside the city to make way for the corporations. The port has been described as a place of misery and fear for mainly Afro-Colombian workers. Putumayo, massive destruction of farmland for oil exploration, and the protesting farmers and trade unions abducted, tortured and shot. Catatumbo, the farmer protest claimed many lives. The hamlet of San Luis Arriba in Corinto, the peasants mobilized against plans to build a new military base on their land. And we know at Pitalito, the farming community there, fertile land and water, they were displaced, they were brought back, they were displaced again, and this was all with the support of the Colombian army. And why? Because the land was needed to cultivate palm trees for biofuels by a few major farmers in the area. And in spite of the land restitution law, in spite of the victims law, this continues. Last September was called Black September in Colombia, over 150 death threats against human rights, farmers, journalists, etc. The Colombian women I met, when they were forced off their lands, they made the point on the land they had the ability to grow food for themselves and their communities. Forced off the land, into the towns, into the cities, into shanties, and what do they have to do? They have to try and get money to buy food, which they had been producing. And we know that it's through land, particularly improving smallholder agriculture, that the best hope for the future lives for those communities for reducing poverty, and that has been pointed out by so many people. This FTA is going to further the process of land grabs by multinational companies, and it's also destroying the environment through pollution. And we know that Colombia has one of the world's most biologically diverse ecosystems. The peace process, yes, is very positive, but there should be no trade-off for concessions in the FTA to the benefit of corporations and big businesses. Over 400 organizations and individuals in the US urged opposition to ratifying their US-Colombia Free Trade Agreement because it failed to recognize labour and human rights and the indigenous groups there. Since that free trade agreement, Colombian exports to America fell by 15% and imports from the US into Colombia grew by 15%. We know the opposition, the depth, the strength of the opposition to this by the farmers, by the women workers, by the trade unionists, by journalists, by human rights defenders, because it's going to increase poverty. So how can Ireland ratify this? We're going to, we know that, but just even slowing the process, delaying it, would send out a signal that we are serious about human rights positions. And we are in the Human Rights Council. We brought up these issues about Colombia. But one thing you can do, Minister, and that is to ensure that Irish companies working in Colombia are not guilty of human rights abuses of their workers.